No, it's just you have a shitty relationship with money.
Welcome to the Kingdom Podcast.
Without passive income, you will work the rest of your life with no guarantee of retirement.
Tell me how this sounds to you. I want to work for the next 40 hours a week for the next 40 years to retire on 40% of my income. Does that sound like a good time to you?
It's all bullshit. You went to school and you learned a system that is failing. You learned a system that was designed to make you an employee.
I'm so fucking tired of hearing people say that they don't need to invest, they don't need to be rich, they don't like money. You need to be rich. You want to know why you need to be rich? Because you need to support everyone around you.
The Kingdom Podcast.
Kingdom Podcast, welcome back. Glad you guys are here. Appreciate your time. So our last couple episodes, we've been talking about a transition, basically the overview of our podcast. We had a good 30 plus episodes on a foundation and how you should start in your mindset and your approach to business. And our last couple episodes been about transitioning to some more of the real estate, some more of the practical applications. So as always, Jordan Stanley Payne, I am joined by my co-host, Mr. Fleming.
Welcome to the party.
Welcome to the party. I wish we should party while we're doing these. Have like a bunch of like background noise, some.
It'd be really great for all the listeners. Everybody would be really happy about that, I think.
That wouldn't be distracting at all, would it?
No, not at all.
So today we're going to talk about one of the, I'm going to call it one of the most debated topics in wholesaling real estate, and that is, do you wholesale forwards or backwards?
Wholesale forwards or backwards? I like that. Does everybody know what wholesaling is? Should we explain it first?
You should probably explain that, Mr. Author.
Oh, don't you patronize me. Yeah, let's start with that. Just first of all, if this is your first time listening to the Kingdom Podcast, welcome. Thank you for taking the time to listen to us and take your time with growing and investing in yourself. I love seeing that, and I love hearing about that. So, welcome. Really happy to have you. Second of all, what we've been doing, like Jordan mentioned, is we've been talking a lot about mindset and building the foundation on past episodes. Now we're transitioning to more training, maybe more real estate specific. And where we usually like to start off with wholesaling. And what is wholesaling? Wholesaling is basically the art of putting a buyer and a seller together, but more specifically, putting those contracts together. So it is the art of locating problems to solve and putting a property under contract. When I say under contract, I mean you sign a purchase-sell agreement with a seller, and then you turn around and you are able to sell that contract to a buyer for a profit. So that is wholesaling. So you're able to solve a problem for a seller, you're able to solve a problem for a buyer, and that is where things start to get confusing in a lot of ways, because so many people like to teach it and or talk about it in different shapes, ways, forms, and directions. And this is what today's episode is going to be on, sounds like, is going to be explaining that direction and making it more step-by-step and linear for you.
That was really good. You should write a book.
I should write a book. And it's actually, that was a huge motivator for the book. Again, if this is your first time listening, Todd Fleming, I recently published my first book. It's called If You Can't Wholesale After This, I've Got Nothing For You. It can be found on Amazon. It's part 1 of 3, and it's split in half between mindset, getting your mind into a place where you can actually complete your first deal and or scale your business depending on where you're at in your business. And then the second half is literally a step-by-step guide, which is what we're going to talk about a little bit here, and getting you set up in an order. That way you are always not only protecting yourself, but protecting your partners and satisfying the seller's needs, because that's incredibly important, that the seller is getting out of the problems that they have presented to you. So that is the entire purpose.
Beautiful. So I want to give a little bit of clarity here. When I say forwards or backwards, and why I say it's extremely debated, Facebook groups, YouTube, Google forums, different books, a lot of people teach this differently. When I say forwards, I mean the process of finding a property, making an offer on that property based on a formula that you learned on YouTube, getting the property under contract, and then from that point, you are trying to find a buyer and get them an assignment contract and close the deal. That is forwards. When I say backwards, what I'm referring to is completely restructuring that, reverse engineering that, and saying, I'm going to find a buyer first, understand what they want, what they need, what their criteria is, and then I'm going to start marketing specifically for what they want to buy. So I'm acting on behalf of the buyer, and I'm doing this backwards. Think of it like driving a car. When you drive a car backwards, you're slower, you're more calculated, you're looking both ways. It takes a little bit longer time. It's exactly what we're referring to in this. I personally, based on experiences in my life, will not teach it forwards. Todd, what do you think about that?
100%. And the reasoning for that is there's less, also commonly called reverse, not just backwards. So when we say forward backwards, it could also be intertwined with traditional versus reverse wholesaling. The reason for reverse wholesaling being the way to go, in our opinion, and the reason I wrote about it the way that I did, was because it's less risk. It's less risk for your seller. It's less risk for you. It's less risk for your buyer. But on top of that, it's much more streamlined and organized. So if, like, let's say, and then this can be done with anything, by the way. This isn't even like just real estate in this example. This is straight up anything of value, right? If you want to buy something at a discount and sell it for a profit, which everybody on the planet, either wants to do or has done, and pretty much any market, whether it be real estate, online sales, trinkets, I mean, you name it, right? You ever been to a flea market? That's buying low and selling high. You've heard that. How do you know what price to get it at? That way you can sell it higher. Well, you have to talk to someone who's buying that, right? Or you have to research who's buying that. So if you can go to the buyer first and find out what they'll pay, you can go offer less than what they'll pay all day long. You can cut your own check, and it's going to sell every single time. So that is why we prefer the reverse strategy of locate your buyer first and then speak with your seller, then locate the property that they want. That way you aren't locking up property, basically putting properties in jail because they can't be sold elsewhere. And then while you're trying to find a buyer, just hoping that you'll eventually find somebody.
Share a story with you guys just to illustrate that point. I use this reference in the book that I'm trying to write. Got jealous of Todd. I was like, this mofo writing books and shit. Like, I better write a book. So I share this story in the book just to drive that point home. One of my first experiences as a wholesaler, I was taught to advertise, I buy houses cash, can close in 10 days, pre-foreclosure, probate, that whole streamlined form of advertising. I was taught to say that. So I said that, and I targeted pre-foreclosures. So I was dealing with a gal named Mary. She was recently divorced, or not divorced. She was recently a widow. Husband passed away. She had no income, this whole thing. And here I show up saying I can close really, really quick. I can pay cash, etc. The reality was I had no buyer, had no clue what I was doing, was operating from a stance of a formula that I learned online. Some of you guys might be familiar with it, ARV times 0.70 minus, etc. So this gal, this elderly gal going through one of the hardest times in her life trusted me because, why did she trust me? Because I told her she could, right? So I tell her I can help her, tell her I can do all this stuff, didn't have a buyer. My problem was I calculated the ARV time, I calculated that formula wrong, and I calculated the repair cost wrong. So she had something like 3 weeks before she was going to lose her property. And I didn't even understand like the process of pre-foreclosure. So I make this gal a promise, tell her all these big, beautiful things. And I tried really, really hard to find a buyer. Guess what happened?
Didn't.
I didn't. And I wasn't really quite aware of when I should have pulled the plug or even how to pull the plug on that. When I actually figured out like, hey, this isn't going to work and she's out of time, that phone call was the hardest thing that I've ever had to do. I literally vomited before I had to call Mary and explain to her, hey, you're out of time, you're about to lose your house, and I didn't perform like I said I could. So because of that story and because of the sentences that came out of her mouth after I told her that, because of those statements that she made, I cannot teach to wholesale forwards. So guys, that's the mistake. That's what a lot of wholesalers are doing. They're running around locking up properties based on a formula that they know nothing about. They don't have a buyer, And a lot of people are running into their own Mary situation where they can't perform. That's going to ruin your reputation pretty quickly in a market.
And it's such a double-edged sword too. So terrible that, that's obviously a terrible situation, horrible. I never ever want to see anything like that. At the same time, it was such a big learning lesson, and you were aware enough to realize that that was a teaching moment in which something needed to change. That's the positive side of it, for your investing piece, or your investing side at least.
So let's rework it though, guys.
Yeah,
Let's rework it.
absolutely.
Let's rework it the correct way, and how I could have avoided that situation. So the correct way, the way that we teach now, this is that reverse or that backwards way. If I would have found a buyer, let's just say that Todd's my buyer. Todd said, I'm looking for 3-bed, 2-bath houses on the east part of town that need light rehab. When I got that phone call from Mary, quote unquote Mary, when I got that phone call and gathered the information on her property, I would have been able to operate with a lot more confidence if I would have called Todd and said, hey man, this is what I know. It's a 3-bed, 2-bath, the side of town that you want. I think it needs light rehab, etc. Here's some pictures. Here's a video. This is what I know about it. What would you pay? So let's just say he throws out 150. I could go and operate with confidence without bullshitting Mary that I really did have a buyer, that I really could close on the property. My moral conscience would have been a lot more clear going into that situation, knowing that I wasn't lying to her. So maybe my buyer wants 150. I offer 135. She agrees. I express to my buyer that she's in pre-foreclosure. Everyone's good. Everyone open, honest, ethical communication, and that never would have happened with her.
Yeah, it is a much more ethical approach for sure. And one thing we didn't even mention, they brought up for a second, was that a lot of people will advertise that they can close super fast, close in 7 days, close in 10 days, close in 72 hours, things like that. When you don't have a buyer first, we're speaking strictly wholesaling here. We're going to get into other topics later on, other episodes, but strictly speaking wholesaling here. If you do not have a buyer lined up, ready to go, are aware of his funds and aware of his resources, and have the title company in order, and have your closing attorney ready to go, you can't close in that amount of time. It's very difficult to close in that amount of time. So right off the bat, you are building a relationship that is extremely fragile. It's built on a foundation of basically popsicle sticks. And if something goes wrong, if it takes more than 10 days, someone's upset. If it can't be a cash deal, someone's upset. If it doesn't close at all, more people are definitely going to be upset. Especially if you have the title company doing the title work, and then you aren't able to locate a buyer, and now there's money out of pocket somewhere. Like, these are all ways in which you're increasing risk and lowering your reliability, which doesn't really make sense. Now, if you take one step back, literally just one step back, and locate who wants to buy these properties first, and make sure that they are rare and ready to go, every contract you get, you sell. Everybody's happy. Every seller's problem solved. Every buyer's problem solved. And you yourself are cutting yourself checks every single month for providing a huge value to everybody. And you actually have the ability at this point to close quickly, to say, hey, we have the cash to do this, because you understand that this is what's actually happening. So you're not falsely advertising just because everyone else says, this is how you market to this, or this is how you do this. You actually have the resources and the abilities to complete these transactions in a way that your marketing is saying that you can. So you can close in 10 days now. You can close in cash. You can take care of back taxes. You can take care of liens and judgments and things like this. Yeah. And all of these things all add up to a lot of resources and a lot of tools in your tool belt that can solve a lot of problems for people.
I'm going to add another element in, but before I do that, quick recap. Wholesaling forwards is you lock up as many properties as you can based on a formula, based on your opinion of value, based on your opinion of the after repair value, your opinion of the repairs needed. Get a property under contract first, and then you attempt to find a buyer. Wholesaling in reverse, you find the buyer first, you ask them what they want, you market for that. When you find that, you run it by them and ask them, hey, look, what do you think? What would you pay? So that's the distinction
Distinction.
Schwan. That's what we're trying to explain, the big difference there and why we specifically do it a certain way. I'm going to throw in another element. A lot of people that are wholesaling forwards, they find a contract online that they may or may not understand. And because they don't have a buyer, their contract is stating very specific things. Due diligence, closing here, earnest money deposit is this or that. So without consulting with your buyer, how do you know that your buyer would agree with all of those different elements in your contract? When you wholesale backwards and have that buyer first, I recommend always you sit down with them with that contract and say, do you agree with this contract? Earnest money deposit, what are you comfortable with? Okay, closing period, how long do you actually need to close? Are we saying cash or do you buy on terms? There's a lot of different elements in your contract that you really shouldn't be promoting and getting properties locked up with that contract until you know what your buyer is willing to do. I've seen a lot of contracts out there that if I'm the buyer, I don't agree with 98% of it. So there's no way that I'm going to agree to that. I'm not going to assume your responsibility in a contract that I don't agree with. So when you do it backwards, you really can operate with a lot more confidence because, again, if Todd's my buyer, I sat down with him for an hour and I showed him the contract and said, dude, you're a buyer. What do you want when we close deals? Well, hey, look, I can't close in 3 weeks, but I can probably close in 4. Okay, great. Hey, look, I need a refundable deposit and my inspection normally takes about 15 days. Okay, great. Now I know. Now I'm not just making random assumptions because I found a contract on Google. What are your thoughts on that?
That was very, very well put. that's my feeling on that. There was no guessing. There's zero guessing. There should be zero guessing in this game. If you are attempting to wholesale, if you've never done a deal, or maybe you've even done a deal or two and it's just kind of worked out because you, like when you signed on with a seller, I mean, you just knew it was an insane deal and there was people around you willing to buy it. But you also, if you've done that, you also know right now, listening to me right now, you have this feeling of like, I pulled it off that time, but what about next time? You have that stress of locating someone. You need to switch your gears. You need to, stop networking with your sellers for a few minutes and start networking with your buyers and locating what they actually want. Because there is zero guessing in this piece of the game. Zero. No formulas. No needed. Not needed. Okay? You don't need to estimate repair costs. That's another big one that people want to estimate and like have a math formula for. There's no need. There's no need to estimate what the offer should be. There's no reason to estimate closing times. There's no reason to estimate anything. There's absolutely zero guessing when you play the game this way. And my other opinion on wholesaling forward, we're going to call it wholesaling forward, so keep it consistent, is that when you're locating the seller first and you don't have a buyer, and you look at, and you put the property under contract to purchase, I understand that you might have your contingencies, your ins and outs, and things like that. But my question is, are you really acting? Are you really not acting as a realtor without a license at that point? So, because what you're doing is you are putting a property under contract, similar to what a realtor would do. A realtor would sign an agreement to sell a property, and then they would market it to the masses. They market it to the public. Now, you might not be putting your property on MLS per se, even though some people do. Some people have the ability to do that and market as, not owned by them yet. But, here in my market, I'm not able to do that. If you put a property under contract as an investor, as someone looking to wholesale it, looking to sell that contract, and you have to market it to the masses and the public, is that not acting as a realtor? Are you not on that fine line? In my opinion, you would be. You're not actually dealing with anybody you have a relationship with. You're not dealing with a partner. You're literally just marketing at that point, which you have to be a realtor to do. Now, if you are doing this backwards and or reverse, and you have your buyer first, and say your buyer is Jordan in this case. Hey, Jordan, what do you like to buy? You tell me your zip code, you tell me your criteria, you tell me your price. Now I go look, now I find a property, now I find a problem that I can solve that happens to have a property in the location that you like, within the criteria that you like. Now I can call you and say, hey man, what do you think? There's nothing wrong with that. You have a relationship with somebody, you're calling to get their opinion. This is not mass marketing. You're not breaking any laws. You're not pushing any of the envelopes. You're not walking any tightrope lines. You are simply trying to solve the problem for the seller. And once you have that number, you can go to the seller with a number that works for everybody. And if it works, great. And if not, you move on. But you are never actually tying anything up that's never going to be sold because you had to guess on a price. So if you're guessing on anything, rework it. Rethink, how can I make this so there's zero guessing involved in this?
There's so much more confidence in that. I know I've said that about 3 or 4 times in this podcast, but me personally, I don't want to gamble. I mean, if I'm going to gamble, I'm going to go to Vegas, but with my business,
go to the casino.
With my business, I really don't want to gamble. You brought up a really good point, and this is probably a good transition onto the next point that I want to make is how ethical are you in advertising that property if you're doing it forwards? For clarity, not a legal professional, but from what I understand, marketing a property that you do not own is illegal. So even if you have it under contract, you're not supposed to be advertising a property. So I see this very, very often on Facebook primarily, sometimes on Craigslist, from people that are going forwards and don't have a buyer. They've got a picture of a house. Let's just call it Craigslist. I've got a picture of a house. And Todd, tell me if you get the impression that I have a house for sale or an equitable position in a contract for sale. Beautiful 3-bed, 2-bath. Here's a picture of it. Beautiful 3-bed, 2-bath, needs minor cosmetic, ARV 150, asking price 105, required POF, blah, blah, blah. You guys have seen that online, right? Whether it's Facebook, Craigslist, etc. You've seen that. When I said that, most people get the impression that I have a house that I have for sale, correct?
General public thinks you're the seller all day long. Yeah, owner, not just seller, owner. Yeah, on title, everything.
Is that legal?
That would be technically illegal in my experience and in my knowledge because you did not disclose that you are just an equitable interest and that you are selling the contract. So and I think specifically in different states, you can't actually post a picture of the house even. I think you can only explain what your equitable interest is. But this goes right back to the point of like, see how much guessing we're doing right now, even like figuring out like, hey, should you be able to do this? This should be totally eliminated. If you're doing this correctly, you will never have to market anything ever. No mass emails, no Craigslist, no Facebook, no social media, no posting like, hey, do you know anybody that would want to buy this house? None of that ever. You should never have to do that. It should always be a phone call in consideration to, hey, I have a possible lead here. Do you think that's something that would work for you? Yay or nay? Yay, move forward. Nay, move on. Literally keep it that simple, and you will never have a problem selling anything.
You guys have to understand that most licensed, ethical professionals do not like wholesalers. A big part of that is we got a lot of people that are running around jacked up on Mountain Dew and Red Bull.
Jacked up on Mountain Dew.
They're running around jacked up on whatever they're jacked up on, and they're locking up every single property that they can based on a formula. They don't have a buyer. They're stressing out title companies. They're stressing out attorneys. They're trashing neighborhoods with crappy signs and advertisement. You guys have to understand that this is why real estate agents and brokers and other professionals in the real estate realm are so frustrated with wholesalers. I mean, they really are causing a lot of headache. Wholesaling.
They also make way more money than them too, so that's what also bothers them.
Right.
Just saying.
I mean, these people have an ethical standard that they have to uphold because they have a license and they're being held accountable by a board and by like the city and stuff like that. When you're a wholesaler, that kind of gets thrown out the window, and people are just kind of running around, like it's the wild, wild west, doing whatever they want. So, a big part of what I'm writing is, if this continues, I'm not confident that wholesaling is going to be around for another 10 years. So the point of the kingdom, the point of this podcast, the point of our message is, look, there's a shady way to do business, and there's an easier and better way to do business.
Even if it's not shady per se. I was just going to say, this episode isn't dedicated to like people that are like doing it that way. Because many, many people that I understand and that I know that are doing it that way, they've just been taught incorrectly. It's not anything that they're trying to be shady or anybody's trying to be unethical or do anything illegal. They're just trying to get in the game risk-free that they were told how, right?
Yeah.
I just want to be here to help you along a path that may be a little bit better for you, a little bit better for everybody else, but at the same time, keep everyone safe. And not only that, it's something that, this episode isn't dedicated to like just shitting on those people or like, being negative about it. It's just bringing to the light that there's usually a better way, or there's possibly a better way, and that no one's upset with you or thinks you're actually unethical if you're just trying to get out there and actually get into the game. And like, but if you understand this way now and you still choose to do a way that is, slightly less, trying to think of the best word for this, that's slightly less, systematic in a way that everyone's protected, that doesn't really make sense to us anymore.
Yeah, and I have a tendency to make things like really negative. Like that's not really my point. Guys, we teach from a place of experience, right? My story about Mary, literally the sweetest old lady I've ever met, turned from that into like a mix between like a pirate, a Navy officer, and a character from The Exorcism of Emily Rose.
She absolutely should have too.
She should have. So
she had every right to.
So when I'm teaching, when Todd's teaching, we're teaching from a point of, hey, look, we got into the game probably a lot like you did, but based on some pretty real experiences that we've had, we've developed a little bit of a better way.
Yeah, we want you to avoid the mistakes that we had to go through, like the pains that we had to go through, because we both had situations in which we couldn't sell a contract and where it was more pain for the seller than it was for us per se, and then that pain was transferred to us. And that is what made us ask the question, is there a better way to do this?
Mm-hmm. Before we close out, I want to share one more thought. And guys, I hope you start to enjoy, or I hope you are enjoying the content that we have here. I'm excited to be diving into different real estate topics. But guys, as a wholesaler, you're often taught to target people that desperately need help. Probate, pre-foreclosure, divorce, tax delinquent. These are people that are going through a very, very real, very scary, frustrating time in their life. As wholesalers, as owners of companies that are providing a service for people, we have a very real obligation to ethically help these people as much as we can. Based on our actions, we can either greatly change their life in a good way or a bad way. I've had experiences where I was not a positive encounter to them. As a business owner, I want to make sure that the experience with my company is a very positive one. So I take it really seriously when I'm dealing with people like Mary that don't have a lot of time or they just need help. And if I'm not the guy that can help them, I always try to refer them to somebody that can help them. So just understand that you're probably going to be encountering people that are going through a very, very real trauma in their life. So, with as much confidence as you can, provide a solution for them. My recommendation is obviously backwards, so that you can go in there and look them in the eye and say, hey, I think I can help you. Something's going to happen. Something always comes up. Maybe there's a delay. Maybe there's an unknown lane or judgment, but at least you can go in with confidence saying, hey, look, on my end, I was as ethical as possible.
And you're going to be able to close so many more deals because of this, and you're going to build a great reputation. Like it's all just going to go so much better when you structure it just a little bit in a better fashion. So that's the message for today. That's what I got today.
Yeah. Guys, thanks for being here. As always, website, www.thekingdomrealestate.com, Snapchat, The Kingdom REI, Facebook, Instagram, @The Kingdom Real Estate. My new podcast, Multifamily Mafia. Obviously, this is the Kingdom podcast. If you guys haven't left us a review, please do so. I appreciate the love. More reviews, more interaction means more people can find the content and start to learn these processes the way that have been effective for us.
And if you want a step-by-step written out guide for you, if you can't wholesale after this, I've got nothing for you. It's on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, major bookstores, online. So check that out. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Know where to find me on Facebook, Todd Fleming.
See you guys next week.